I'm chasing beauty and painted gold, but I found the real me in clouds of smoke.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Laura and I'm going to be the host for today's event, which is called Graduate Development, Designing and Delivering Programs with Impact. So to those of you who've attended our events before, you'll know that at Ivy House, our expertise is in two things: leadership development and behavioural change. And historically, we've worked with CEOs and executives around the world, supporting them to become extraordinary leaders and lead extraordinary lives. But we're now on a mission to bring that same kind of life-changing development to those at the start of their journey, at a time when we know it can make the biggest difference. So we now work with emerging talent, early in career talent, school leavers, apprentices, first and second line leaders, but increasingly we're approached to support grad populations. And that's exactly who we're going to focus on today, sharing our learning from the programs we've designed and delivered post-pandemic. So I probably don't have to tell those of you here that grad recruitment is on the increase. In fact, it's set to rise by about 15% this year. And the majority of those guys will be Gen Zs. And whilst COVID's impacted everybody, it's the grad population that have perhaps been most significantly impacted. It's changed how they like to learn, how they show up, their needs and wants from organisations, the skills they have to cope in the work environment. So for your graduate and Gen Z hires, the headline is everything's different. And what we want to dig into today aren't just the broad generational learning differences, the stuff you can find about how Gen Zs like to learn on Google, but the specifics of the COVID generation, the things that you might not know, the things you might not have thought about, and are learning about how to design and deliver a program that works for them. One that gets the best of them from day one, allows them to have a positive impact in your organisation sooner, and keeps them in your business. So today we're going to be running as an expert panel, focusing on the key learnings of what does and doesn't work. So we have an absolutely incredible panel with us today. We're going to be posing some questions to them so that they can share their learning with you. And we're going to open up for a Q&A at the end to give as much time as possible for your questions to be answered. So my ask is save up your questions until the end and we will try and get through as many as we can. We're also going to have our famous Ivy House golden ticket moment at the end, where we will pick one lucky winner to receive a fully funded place either for themselves or someone from their organisation to attend our Life Leader programme, which is our leadership and life skills programme, which is delivered 100% virtually. The final thing is just to let you know, we are going to be sharing the recording of today's event. And I have an ask, which is if you're happy to, I know lots of you will be eating lunch, but pop your cameras on. It's always lovely to see people's faces and talk to people rather than just little black boxes. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing panel. We have Neil Trevino. So Neil is a passionate facilitator and coach. He's developed leaders across multiple industries, including the police service, where he spent a decade as an operational officer. We have the wonderful Claire Mitchell. Claire is our Director of People and Programmes. She spent over 20 years designing award-winning development programmes. We have Deandra Murphy, who is our Director of Client Experience. She's worked in the L&D world for over 10 years. We have Emmy Anderson, who offers a slightly different perspective. So Emmy's just graduated from the University of Birmingham, and she's just started her first professional role as a sales and marketing executive. And Caroline Ellis. So Caroline's early careers manager at Spirax-Sarco, and they have an international graduate population. They run an incredible development program for their grads. So we are absolutely thrilled she's going to share her experience with us today. So thank you to our panelists. I'm going to kick things off with you, Neil. Can you start by giving us a bit of context? So how are these guys distinct from the rest of the Gen Z population? What do we have to be aware of?
Yeah, great start and great question, Laura. Hello, everyone, and it's an absolute joy to be here. So, Carl, what a big question to kick us off. I think let's start from a place of context. And I think to help do that, let's quickly review what these guys have experienced to get into the place where they are today. So let's focus on COVID. And actually, COVID was such a huge defining moment for our grads. And I think it's worth just quickly unpicking that. And what does that actually mean? What does it look like? And actually, where has that placed them in terms of a starting point as they enter the workplace? So I guess, if you like, the news headlines around that are that we know their experience of education has been very, very different. It's been delivered online. They've had exams cancelled, and they've missed out on things that perhaps you and I, or all of us, taken for granted over the years, which is the opportunity to form those human connections, those relationships and the networks that we've all built over the years, which have really served us in a number of different ways, from finding jobs to mentoring to so many different things. And they haven't had the opportunity to do that because they've been at home. They've been in front of their screens and they've not had that opportunity. And what's happened with that is they've missed the opportunity to grow and develop some of those fundamental skills that you and I have developed, perhaps without even realizing it over the years, such as how to talk to people in certain circumstances, how to work with different generations. And because they've lost those opportunities, they have experienced quite a lot of isolation during that time. And that's had a profound impact on their confidence to start with. And actually, in a recent survey, it was discovered that for graduates coming out in 2022, 55% of those graduates were worried about getting a job full stop. And 33% of those were worried about getting jobs in their specialist area of education, which is really profound. So they are very, very, very unsure about the marketplace. And they've had the confidence not because of that. But on top of that, we've got aspects such as mental health as well. And the graduates that are coming into the workplace in 2022 are said to be some of the most affected by mental health issues because of their experience, the isolation of their educational journey so far. But I think the other thing of note, Laura, before we kind of move on perhaps to some of the other questions, is they are coming into the workplace now in a hybrid environment, whereby they're on their own a lot, where they're working from home. And with that comes perhaps a lack of supervision sometimes, a lack of support. And so they've got to be really, really good at being, what's the word I'm looking for? They've got to be able to take 100% ownership for the results they get and be really internally driven. So collectively, we take all that into consideration. Their starting places they're coming into the working environment is very, very different. So I think that gives us some context as to who these individuals are, these human beings, and where they are. Thanks, Laura.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Neil. Claire, I'm really interested from your perspective, what's the impact of that? So particularly in terms of what they want, what they need, and how they show up.
So, of course, everyone here will know there have always been challenges to overcome. Things like delivering the programme in an engaging way for grads, developing all the different skills they need for all the varied roles they're going to do, working with multiple line managers, supporting them after the scheme finishes, because of course offboarding can be quite a shock, retaining them in the business afterwards. But since COVID, how they show up, how they learn, how they cope in a work environment have all been massively impacted. And at Ivy House, what we've noticed is that that's really down to two things, as Neil just alluded to, the amount of ownership they take and their ability to be a courageous learner. Now, in lots of ways, many of the post-grad grads tend to be young for their age. They haven't left home, tended to do that before they go to uni. That means they've had more parent hand-holding. There was perhaps less opportunity for them to get a part-time job. We're seeing a real gap in terms of how they take ownership because of those things. Things like how they manage upwards, how they take ownership for one-to-ones, for diary management, for feedback. But we're also working with some young people at the moment who are still really angry about what's happened to them during COVID. Understandably, of course, but really holding on to that anger in a bitter or victimy way, which gets in the way of them taking ownership for what happens next. At Ivy House, we talk about radical acceptance, and acceptance of what is. And that's really required to go on and take ownership for what is to come next. Now, in terms of courageous learning as another challenge, most grads have typically been high achievers. They're used to studying for a period of time, submitting coursework or sitting an exam, although Neil did allude to that, they've been cancelled for some, which is another issue, but submitting coursework, sitting the exam, and then moving on. typically passing, typically being a high achiever. But life and leadership isn't the same. You can't cram for an exam and pass and move on. It's an ongoing, lifelong journey. And up to this point, grads' currency has been knowing the answer. So they view work as needing to know all the answers, to be good at it, to be really valued. But of course, they don't know all the answers. They're not that comfortable with being vulnerable yet. And when they don't know all the answers, they can get overwhelmed. So the real challenge, I think, is the fact that their self-worth is tied up with their ability to do a good job, and good job equals know all the answers. So a deep curiosity is needed, along with that understanding that your self-worth, your self-esteem, your self-confidence isn't tied up with work-specific tasks. It isn't tied up with knowing all the answers or getting things right all the time. Because there's two types of confidence, right? There's core confidence and situational confidence, and they're really separate. Just because you're not good at something specific yet doesn't mean you're not good. So to build situational confidence, you need that curiosity to ask questions, to practice, to fail, to get better and build up. But you can't do that if your actual self-esteem, your core confidence is getting knocked every time. So I think changing that mindset of I have to know all the answers to being more like I have to be a courageous learner is a really big challenge to overcome. Thanks, Laura.
Amazing. Thanks, Claire. I think when we talked about this, what's also interesting is there are lots of challenges. I'm hearing that. I think lots of people on the call today will experience that. But also there are some real positives. Can you tell us a bit more about the positives that are coming out from everything these guys have gone through? What are the good things that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, COVID has stunted some experiences, but there are some positives as well, like you say, and some key skills that graduates have that previous generations perhaps don't. Because COVID's given people the opportunity to become a real self-starter. Grads have learned things online that they wouldn't have previously, accessing courses online they wouldn't have access to normally, with time that they wouldn't normally have had. So we've seen some people really developing themselves, developing self-learning skills. Some have got really comfortable with virtual online working and, dependent on their personality or preferences, got used to building relationships online. And I think some have actually increased their own resilience from going through this experience. The thing is, that's only true for some. For others, resilience was not built at all. And in fact, anxiety and depression have increased for some. So I think the thing to be mindful of is that the positives are not universally true for all grads. Those that did develop those skills tend to be ones that have already developed ownership, courageous learning themselves. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks, Claire. I'm going to hand over to Deandra now. I've got a bit of a killer question for you, I'm afraid, which is, what have we learned? What does and doesn't work for these guys?
Thanks, Laura. So in terms of what does and doesn't work, I think it might be first useful to look at what we're actually experiencing on the programme. So there will be exceptions to the rule, but actually what we've experienced over the last 2 to 3 years when working with grads, and to a similar extent school leavers who are of a similar generation, is that our clients are really struggling to engage and connect grads with the learning. So actually we're struggling, from kind of to a smaller and greater extent to get them to accept calendar invites. So diary management, Claire has mentioned, it's just not a skill that they've developed. So things as minute as that have been really challenging. If they're not accepting calendar invites, actually, then we struggle to get them to actually attend the workshops. And then when they attend, it's attending on time. It's actually being focused on the workshops and not being distracted or doing work off the side of their desk, in particular if it's virtual. So we've really struggled from that point of view. And although clients have come up with a number of different kind of, I suppose, strategies to re-engage them, that's what we've been really, really focusing on. So what's not working for graduates is not taking a different comms and engagement approach than you might with your other talent. So that's the type of thing that we've been really focused on as a result with our partners, with our clients over the last couple of years, to engage them differently and to really connect them with the why of their learning, and to make them really aware that, as we all know, learning opportunities, bespoke development opportunities don't come along every year, but they haven't spent time in the workplace. they haven't been in the office, you know, on a lot of occasions. So we really need to inform, engage, and excite them much, much earlier and differently too.
That's amazing. Thank you, Dee. What I'm keen to hear is a slightly different perspective. I think it would be really easy to talk about our experience in the theory, but we've got someone here who has just entered the workplace straight from university. And Emmy, I'd love your perspective on what it's actually like. Are there any curveballs, things we need to know, things we haven't touched upon?
Tell you what, it's quite funny. I'm sat here listening, and as the token grad right now, I sort of thought I'd be coming on and sharing some insights, but actually I've already had a few aha moments myself where I'm like, that makes sense. I see that so much, or I saw that so much when I was at university, especially. But yeah, sorry. So hi everyone, my name's Emmy. As Laura said, I graduated this summer, which effectively meant that I had about 5 months of the normal university experience, and then the rest of my time was spent in a tiny university bedroom on online seminars, normally with my microphone and my camera off because that's what everyone did. I never got to know my lecturers. My classmates were effectively just names on a blank screen that I knew I'd never really get to meet. So it was a very, very isolating environment and very weird way to do university as well. This summer, I started at my first sort of proper adult job, and it's been great. But about a month into work, I had a meeting with my boss, and she gave me some feedback, which I'm so glad I got. And she told me that I was the quietest person she'd ever worked with. And what she meant by that was that she had no idea how I was getting on with my work, whether I was struggling, whether I needed any help, whether I had any questions. And I realized that over the 3 years I've been at uni, not only had I been isolated, but I'd also got into the habit of isolating myself. So I was, you know, so used to just getting on with it and not bothering people with emails, not bothering to try and ask questions because often I wouldn't get a response anyway. And it had become such a habit for me that I brought this into the workplace. And now I'm not saying that all of the grads that you're going to hire are going to be like me. Many of them will have had very different takeaways from the pandemic. But what I am quite sure of is that going through your education during a pandemic will have had an effect on how they behave, how they show up to work, how they see themselves, all of these things, which will affect the way that they work for you. I actually went out and I questioned about 100 graduates, some of my peers, and I questioned them on a load of things. But one of the main things that really surprised me was I asked them about feedback and how they feel about feedback. And it came back that over a third of them, and let's be honest, it'll probably be more if they were being a bit more honest, but over a third of them said that they were so scared of hearing something negative about themselves, that they would rather just not ask for feedback at all, not get any feedback. And this shocked me. And then I realized that they are so used to just getting on with it and doing things themselves that they no longer know how to ask for help or admit to not knowing something. So I would say that my main takeaway, sorry, I've been talking for quite a while there, but my main takeaway would be that I think now more than ever, it's so important that we teach our grads and support them in taking ownership. And a big part of that actually is creating a really safe space where they know that it's okay not to know the answer. And it's actively encouraged for them to ask for help, and that they get to see the benefits of what it's like to work collaboratively in a team and get those really close, deep relationships with their colleagues that so far they've really missed out on, especially in the hybrid world. So thanks. I know that was a bit long. Thanks, Laura.
That's amazing. Thank you, Emmy. I'm keen to know from you, Dee, what can employers do to help grads be more engaged with the learning?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Emmy. It was that felt, even though I've chatted to you about this before, that still, I had some aha moments as you were speaking. So yeah, well done and thank you. I think, yeah, what we've been focusing on with our clients is exactly that. How can we help people who've had this different experience, you know, in the lead up to working for our organizations, engage with the learning that so many organizations are really heavily investing in. So it's important. And what we've done and what we're seeing initial signs of success with is really looking at the graduate cycle, life cycle, or kind of timeline. So actually, rather than waiting until the learning begins to start talking about it, to start engaging them with it, actually, we have access to these graduates much, much earlier. So whether that be during recruitment or induction, there's some real opportunities to, as I said, inform, engage, and excite them at those points. So, for example, what we've done with one of our clients is during the recruitment period, we've spent some time with their recruitment partner so that they know all about the program that we're running, the unique opportunity that these graduates will experience. And we've connected it with the jobs that they'll be doing so that they're really selling this graduate opportunity with the learning that comes with it. So from the off, these graduates are excited, or at least informed, about the program which they're going to attend. We then, during the induction period, get ourselves in there as well. So whether it be, we've done things like a merch drop during their kind of induction week, they might receive a book. So our founder Elka has written a great book that talks about the skills that they will experience on their graduate programs. We might drop them that book with, a bookmark and a QR code of Elka welcoming them to the organization and talking about the learning they'll experience. It doesn't have to be those things, but again, that's another opportunity to tell them about what they're going to experience, to tell them why it's special, and to connect it to their future at this organization. And then throughout that life cycle, so in the lead up to their learning, during their learning, after their learning, we're checking in with them. So before they come on the program, we really should be engaging with their stakeholders. This is a biggie. For those of you running grad programs, this can often feel like make or break. If you've got their line managers engaged, supportive, giving them genuine permission to go and attend the workshops and to really give it their all, we tend to see a totally different turnout and engagement than when we don't get that. So we work really closely with our clients to give them any and all opportunities to use us to engage their line managers. That might be developing line manager packs that talk about the program, how they can support. It might be line manager calls so that we can really bring the program to life and demonstrate the different opportunities they have for embedding the learning when their people come back to work. And ideally, we would love to get a senior sponsor involved. So if your graduates are in the operation itself, let's get a senior operational sponsor that they respect and that they'll listen to, and get them talking about how this kind of learning has affected their career and led to their success. So stakeholder engagement is a really, really big one. And then, conscious that I can very passionately talk about all the things we're trying. I'm going to stick to the really key ones which have worked. I would say proximity. So whoever is managing the program, that might be someone in talent, someone in learning development, early careers, to really stay close to the feedback, particularly if you haven't been seeing the type of engagement you're looking for. So we look for feedback from graduates after each workshop, and we don't wait until the end of the program to check in or to review that feedback. So if we see something like, for example, a score out of 10 that's less than 7, or we see a comment that kind of, I suppose, demonstrates a lack of understanding, a lack of engagement, whatever it may be, we're curious about it. We go to that delegate, either ourselves with the permission of our clients, or our client, or alongside our client, to be curious, to say what's working, what's not working, because often it's not that somebody's not engaged, it's all of the things that Claire, Neil, Emmy have spoken about. It's that they didn't understand something but didn't know that they could ask for support. Their manager hasn't given them permission to attend, and actually they felt as though they should be doing their job on the side of the workshop, so really haven't managed to engage with the learning. So there's often a real reason as to why someone's not engaging. So actually checking in with them regularly allows us to unlock that engagement. And if we get it early, means that they get the benefit from the rest of their learning opportunity. So those would be the key ones: inform, engage, and excite throughout the graduate life cycle. Engage with key stakeholders that will support your people internally, and stay close to them. Proximity throughout the program.
Amazing. Thank you, Deandra. I'm really keen on your perspective, because I think what we see is typically grad development focused on but I guess more technical skills. It's about a set learning pathway. I've been on a grad development program, looked a certain way, and that's the path we followed. And it was a lot about like imparting specific knowledge. I know from your experience that doesn't actually always make for a successful grad program. So from your perspective, everything I guess you've done in the police to really have an impact in terms of engagement and retention, what more does graduate development have to focus on?
I'm going to jump straight in and say we have to be developing the person, not just the position. And I don't know if I came up with that phrase. If I did, I'm absolutely going to say I did because I love it, because it encompasses everything that I'm about to talk about. Typically, what we've seen over the years with grad development is some really great structures and processes that develop the skills that people need to do a job, right? So people will get those skills, they're going to do great things. But actually, sometimes what has been neglected is actually looking under the bonnet, if you like, sometimes for the individuals and looking at what opportunity lies beyond just the skills and helping them develop the skills that amplify the other skills that you're giving them from a kind of day-to-day running perspective. So let me quickly share how I experienced that in the police. And before I left the police, I was really fortunate to work on a grad development program, and it's the first of its kind in the police service, certainly in the constabulary that I was working in. And we brought in 15 graduates who had never ever touched a pair of handcuffs, sat in front of a police car or anything, and we gave them a uniform, and I had the job to grow them into a fully fledged, accomplished police officer within the space of 2 years. And I set about doing that by giving them all the tools they needed, giving them all the knowledge, all the equipment. And after a few months, I realized it was only getting me so far. And when I started to have some really good conversations with those individuals, people were saying things like, actually, I don't know how to have a conversation like that with anybody. I don't know how to ask for help. To come back to Emmy's point, and what I'd done is I'd assumed that they had all these skills already, and I could ignore all of those skills and just focus on the skills they needed to do the job, which was the practical side of things. And there was a real lesson in there for me around, okay, maybe we need to stop and think about this a little bit more carefully. And certainly in today's climate, with today's grads that are coming through, I think we can not be as effective as we can be if we assume that they've got the skills that you and I have had for many years and had the opportunity to grow and develop. Emmy, I thought you articulated that beautifully about how you'd isolated yourself. And actually, there's a danger that, in today's climate, that we become frustrated sometimes, or we assume that graduates are fine because they're not asking any questions. But actually, what sits beneath that is huge insecurity. Their self-confidence is really, really low. And so we have to, and grad programs have to develop in a way that really nurtures those skills that we have had the luxury, if you like, to enjoy the opportunities to grow over the years. So going back to the start of my answer for this question, we have to be thinking about how we can grow the person, not just the position. And here at Ivy House, that's exactly what we focus on. We empower people to take 100% ownership. We empower people to be courageous learners. And when you have that as a starting place for your grads, all the other great stuff that you've been doing for many, many years, once you bolt those two things together, it's a really powerful formula. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Neil. And I think you possibly touched on some of this already, but from your perspective, why is it worthwhile giving this kind of development, which in our experience is typically safe for those at the peak of their career? What's the benefit of giving them this kind of development at this stage?
There's two ways I can answer that, I think. There's the obvious one where if you give people learning earlier on in their career, give them the opportunity and support them to grow and evolve their skills, then they will get better results. And that makes sense from a business perspective. Employees that are engaged and they are effective in their roles will get you on average 20% increase in the results that they get, which is great. But then there's this other whole piece around culture. And actually, if you give people at the start of their journey this learning, then how they behave and how they show up on a day-to-day basis will have a ripple effect across your organization. And I always think it's really useful to think about your culture across an organization like a grapevine. And sure, as leaders, you can send messages out into the grapevine, but what you can't control is those small interactions that are happening on a day-to-day basis with everyone across your organization. You can only influence that. And so by giving this learning to people at the start of their journey, then effectively you've got people in your grapevine who are representing everything that you want to see in your organizations from a cultural perspective, others will see that and it will start to breed across your organization. So there's the results side of things that we're talking about here, but also there's the cultural piece. And the earlier you can start the kind of weeds growing out through your culture, if you like, the bigger the benefits, the more people it will impact.
Thanks,
Laura.
I guess linked to that, Deandra, one thing that people are really keen to do is make the most of the grads in their organisation from day one. And is there anything from your experience that organisations can do to really encourage that?
Absolutely. So I think lots of people, understandably, invest in grad programs because it's something that typically you might have to do to compete in your marketplace. And it is a heavy investment. We see big budgets for graduate programs. And it could be seen as a brilliant opportunity to give learning to these young, bright, energetic, talented individuals, and then point them at a problem, point them at your challenges, your business challenges, your business opportunities, and see what they do. So some of the organizations we work with, the ones that have seen the most impact after a graduate program are those that have done just that. So that might be on a smaller scale. So line managers using, or I suppose encouraging graduates to embed the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors they've learned within their own role. So that might be, slightly increasing the span of their role. That might be, line managers encouraging people to teach back to their teams, to their departments, so that not only do they see the impact on this one individual, but suddenly their whole teams or departments benefit from the investment. But it could also be at a slightly larger scale too. So we see organizations giving graduates and talent, business projects. So problems that the most senior executives have been working on for 1, 2, 5, 10 years, but perhaps haven't cracked because of a busy day job, or because of their point of view and perspective. Give those to people much earlier in their career and see how they approach them. So it might be business projects. It could also be developing things. We've seen organizations be really creative around this. So they might have a junior board, for example. So taking the same agenda, the same questions, the same opportunities to what they're calling a junior board of, graduates, school leavers, early talent, and seeing what they come up with. So again, really using and giving your graduates the opportunity to use their newfound knowledge, skills, and behaviors in a way that works for the business and has genuine ROI for the business that's invested in them. So we've seen lots and lots of creative ideas. I think that the key principle for me is that the business believes there is value in pointing them at an opportunity and then doing what works, within your business, within your culture.
Thanks, Deandra. Caroline, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay. I know you have a graduate population, which, to add complexity, is spread across the world. So what's your learning been in terms of, I guess, firstly, the training and development the current graduate population really needs?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, lots of what Emmy was saying resonates as well, and I'm seeing we have typically we recruit about 25 grads a year. So at any one time we've got about 40-50 grads on programme across about 12 countries, plus about 70-80 alumni across about 15 countries. So there's lots of different perspectives that we see, and I think I was thinking about this in preparation for today, and reviewing how people react and what they need, and it's a constantly evolving program. So it's not set in stone that you have to do this and you have to do that, and that's how it works. We've evolved with the change in what the grads need, basically. We've tried to make the content more relatable and relevant, and also change the delivery of some of that. Again, sometimes they don't want online learning, that they just sit at a screen, because they've done that, as Emmy has said. we've also, as a whole organisation, but also really picked up this for the grads, is a massive focus on physical and mental well-being. In January this year, we launched our inclusion commitments globally, which has been kind of revolutionary across the business at all levels, but the grads are really embracing it, and it has made such a huge difference. And they're really looking for that. So I'd say that's a big factor.
Thank you very much. And in terms of the changes you've seen in how they show up, has there been a big difference to previous grad populations?
So we've seen a real difference with the raw grads, yes. And we've kind of almost seen two pockets. So we've had raw grads and we've had much more experienced, I say much, up to 5 years post-programme, who've gone and got jobs and perhaps graduated in 2019 or 2020 or 2020, sorry, what am I trying to say? 2019 or 2020, and they didn't get a job. Then COVID hit. So they've then gone and got a job somewhere else, and they're no longer a raw grad. So the raw grads 100% have less work experience. So they've come off programme without having had a year in industry potentially, without having had any kind of real work experience that they can relate back to. They're less confident. I think there's a real mix of some of them have really become accustomed to working virtually and just dealing with it. That's how university was, that's how work's going to be. Others have really fought that and said, no, I want to be in. And even until very, very recently, our China grads were desperate to be in the office, and our head office in China is in Shanghai. They were in a full lockdown until July this year. So it's been really, really challenging trying to get that balance between we want you in and the grads kind of going, well, I'm all right at home now, thanks, because I've got used to it. So that's been a bit tricky. And I think overall the grads are less decisive, more questioning. We've had some wobbles along the way of grads, whether this is actually right for them. We've had grads not sure about taking the offer in the first place. We've just had our latest cohort start this week. We've seen a lot more uncertainty. They're just less sure. And we haven't seen that in the past. So I think that's been a big difference.
That's fascinating. So has that had a significant impact in terms of what you offer them and how you develop them?
I think for these our 21 intake and our 22, the 21 intake, we already knew that we were going to have to make, we were still in the pandemic really, so we were making differences. For this intake, yes, we've learned from the 21 intake how much they need more guidance, they need more input. Some of the stuff Neil was saying is absolutely right. They just haven't been around as much as the previous grads, and so we're making allowances for that. And I think there's this very fine balance that we constantly challenge ourselves with, of too much hand-holding and too much kind of arms around them. This is the real world. We have a great program. We want them to be future leaders, so we don't want to mollycoddle them, but at the same time these guys have really been through it, and we want to support them. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
I'm going to ask you to share, if you don't mind, what are the key learnings that you've had, or you think it's really important for the people on the call today to really consider in terms of designing and delivering effective programs? Yeah,
so we've adapted what we're assessing and how we measure it. So we have a potential framework that we use as a business at a senior level, and we decided that because our program is about future leaders, we wanted to use that framework for actually assessing and recruiting for this year at our assessment centres. So it's, rather than going with core competencies, which is in a way harder for these grads to demonstrate because they just haven't had that experience. It's more about the ways in which they behave, their ability to interact, all of those kind of things, and looking at their ability to pick things up and interact with other people. So that's been a really key thing, and how we measure it. So we went into our assessment centres ready for this cohort. And my approach was very different with the assessors, explaining to them that these guys are different. You know, you're recruiting a different type of grad. We're not trying to lower the caliber and lower the bar, but at the same time, they will have different experiences. They won't be as confident. They won't have attended an assessment centre before, and they certainly won't have done that virtually. So don't be too harsh, and just kind of try and be relatable and friendly. I think the other thing we've seen is looking at what we're looking. So as an organisation, similar to the framework, we have been looking at what we want our senior leaders to show up and how we want them to behave, and for them to be approachable and genuine. And we're doing a load of work at a senior level with that. So we're doing a really similar thing with the grads coming in, because again, we want them to be our future leaders, and we really want to work with them to kind of, from day one, have that approach to how they work, who they work with, how they deal with their peers, how they deal with senior leaders, and at all levels of the organisation. And again, as people have said, before on this session, that's a challenge, because they haven't had that opportunity through university and life up to this point.
Fascinating. Thanks so much, Caroline. That is it in terms of my questions. We're now going to open up to questions from the audience. I'm going to ask you to do one of two things, slight curveball here, Andy, to what we'd planned. Either pop your digital hand up and I'll come over to you and I will point a question. Either let me know who you'd like the question to go to, or I'll try and find the best person for that, or type it in the chat, and we will get Deandra to point those questions at the right person. So I have got John now. John, feel free to pop your camera on. You'll have to
Hello.
yourself.
I will beam myself down from the Enterprise.
Perfect.
There we go.
Thank you.
So it's John from NatWest. Hi, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting, actually listening from a graduate's perspective firsthand has really brought that to light for me. I suppose I've got one question. We've talked very generally about the Gen Z experience. When we start bearing in mind all the work that I know Ivor House do in this space, when we start layering diversity lenses onto it, for example, social mobility, are we seeing that we need to spin even more plates for certain populations in that respect?
Fantastic question. I'm going to throw this out and see if anyone in the team would like to take that question.
I think the short answer is yes, absolutely, John, 100%. There's more plates spinning. I'd love Caroline to give her views on this, but certainly from an Ivy House perspective, we have seen that you need to keep more plates spinning. And I think thinking about things in a hybrid way has been really useful. We've noticed that some graduates have got really comfortable having everything delivered to them virtually. They've got comfortable doing things in their pajamas at the end of the bed, and they've got a virtual confidence without a face-to-face confidence. But we've also noticed that there are some graduates say they are desperate for the connection, the sense of belonging. They really want to come into the office and be face-to-face. And I've noticed that some organisations are going out on polls and saying, who wants what? Do you want to be face-to-face or do you want to be virtual? And then going with the majority. And for me, that really doesn't work for the reasons that you've just described about D&I and inclusion. And I think actually, unfortunately, without meaning to be patronising at all to the graduates, I don't think they know what's the best thing for them, because actually research shows that whilst we've got comfortable in our pajamas at the end of our bed, it's not good for our well-being. And actually to come into a face-to-face group in the office, get a sense of connection, get a sense of belonging, and really feel like you're a community is really good for not only inclusion but also for well-being. And I think we need to take some ownership for supporting this group of people in terms of their well-being as well as everything else. So I think a bit of both, and I'd love to come to Caroline to answer that question as well, please, Caroline.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I do agree with you, and I think one of the challenges we have faced hugely with the grads on the programme, because they do 4 6-month rotations, one of which is international, and then the grads coming off programme, they move into a permanent role, is the workforce coming back in. So they're rotating around, they're willing to be there, they're getting that message from me saying, no, you're on the programme, you're here in person. And they go into an office and they're one of 2 or 3 people, and that's a real challenge for them. But one of the other things we've also had to really do a lot with is being mindful of the challenges globally and the differences. So as I referenced earlier, you know, in China, they were in that lockdown much longer than most other countries. And we've had these different waves, and people aren't aware of them. But because it's happening, you've got to kind of zone in and say, look, I know you can't go into the office right now, but it won't be for long, and almost not rub their faces in the fact that somebody in the UK is, you know, no masks and cracking on as usual. So being aware of it. And I also think, as you said, about the other two things are the pastoral care, which I kind of hinted at earlier. There's a lot more of that in my role than there used to be, I would say, really looking after them and making them feel part of a community and really encouraging them to take part in that. And some of the softer skills, not taken for granted that there's stuff that they just don't know. And it's, whether it's just the generation, whether it's COVID, whether it's a mixture, don't know, but I think being willing to change your expectations of the grads is key.
I also would add building in more spaciousness to answer your question, John, absolutely. But building in, I think we were in danger at one point of kind of scripting every moment of their grad development, and when they're together, whether it's virtual or face to face, having content that we wanted to push to them and get through. And actually they just want to be together spaciously, to connect, to share experiences, to feel like they're a community. And so we realized that isn't a waste of time. In fact, it was a waste of time to not do it, because we used to put them in breakout groups virtually, go into the breakout group, see what they were doing, and they were just connecting. So actually, rather than being frustrated about that, what we learned was to build more time in for that, which absolutely helps the DE&I challenge as well, John, when we just let people be a bit more and allow for that in the programme. Let them be together.
Less is more sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Less content and more just being together and letting them talk about what they want to talk about. Yeah.
I suppose more less consumption, more contribution, I think, is how I would summarize that.
I think that's a great summary. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Brilliant question. I'm going to go to Lisa next. Feel free to turn your camera off, but if you can unmute yourself, that'd be fab.
That's fine. Apologies, I'm not going to put my camera on. I'm just recovering from COVID. It would not be a pretty sight. My question is actually about pressure that we're finding our grads are feeling. And it's really interesting in modern life, the way that our grads seem to be benchmarking themselves against people and constantly pushing themselves for progression. So we're having a lot of conversations with grads who feel that throughout the programme, they constantly need affirmation around their progress, where they're going, the way that they can, you know, simple things like removing junior from their job title sooner and getting that progression. And it feels very much more competitive quicker than it did with our previous grads. You know, we've had a 2-year programme for a while, and all of a sudden people feel like they want things quicker, or they need to be feeling like they're moving quicker. And I just wondered if anyone else has experienced that, and if they've got any advice and suggestions about how we can help our grads recognise, you know, some things just take time and it's okay, but it feels like they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves.
Brilliant.
I completely agree with you, Lisa. We've seen exactly the same with our grads coming off programme, so the 2020 intake, who had a really tough time. You know, they joined slap bang in the middle of a pandemic. They were recruited during the pandemic, but their expectations of themselves are very high, and their expectations of what we give them are very high. They've been the most challenging cohort coming off programme with their salary expectations, their role expectations. And in terms of what we've done about that, we have listened, we have made some changes, and we have kind of removed, we had a bit of a buffer as to where they could come off at the level. And we've actually removed that because we've realised the world has changed post-COVID. And for all the reasons you listed, it's something without bowing down and just kind of, you know, taking it, whatever they requested, it prompted us to review it and make some changes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caroline. Philip, I'm going to come to you. Oh, sorry, Neil.
So it's just a quick point off the back of that. I think that was a really, really good question. And it links back to the point I was making earlier about how do we not only grow the skills they need to do the job, but how do we grow and support people to develop those skills they need to lead extraordinary lives and do extraordinary things. And that's a skill in its own right. So actually, how do we help people process those thoughts that they are having in relation to, I've got to be like them, I've got to push on, that, you know, how do we help people process them, understand what's going on for them in those moments, and then be okay with those thoughts, but then make really decisive changes to the way they operate and make choices that really serve them well going forward, not just to be in that reactive mode, because that's really detrimental to their mental health. Great question.
Just building on that, another thing I think it's been really useful for us to support. We talk about radical support and radical challenge with all of the graduates that we develop, and absolutely they need a lot of radical support. But I think there's some radical challenge there as well to your question, Lisa, which is there's a lot of push. When can I be promoted? When can I earn more? What can I do? And it's all pushed onto the organisation to get them promoted, to get them a career path. And we've talked to some graduates that your career isn't actually just a ladder going in a straight line. It's often very squiggly because you need to learn a lot. So we've challenged our grads by saying, if you want that job title or that salary, what do you need to learn next in order to be of value? In order to merit that, warrant that. So it's about taking ownership, comes back to ownership again. So that question of, it's going to be squiggly, not linear, and you might squiggle over there for a little bit to learn something very specific in order to move up. So what do you need to learn next? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. An absolutely brilliant question. I'm going to apologise because I think my camera might be lagging, but I'm hoping that you can hear me all. So my next person with their hand up is Philip. Philip, I'd love to hear your question.
You talked about the hybrid working. We've got a number of graduates who came in over COVID, and we're now a fully hybrid organisation. What do you do to encourage them to come together, right? And not just, it's easier to be at home, so I'm not going to come into the office. What sort of things can you do to help encourage them to see their peer group within the organisation, even though they're working across different teams?
Great question. Caroline, I'm going to put that one out to you. I'm conscious you have an international population, so I'll also throw it out to you to answer.
One of the things I've really noticed that has just kind of happened rather than me hugely pushing it is, as an organisation, we give all of our employees 3 days paid volunteering leave a year, and we have a really big focus on sustainability. And so one of the things we've been really kind of just talking about is use your volunteering days. They're there to be used. You know, go and work at do a good cause. But what they're actually choosing to do is get teams together as whether it's just grads or whether it's people on the site that they're working on, and getting a whole group of them to volunteer and do a litter pick, or to build a new biodiversity garden, or to clear out a hospice visitors garden, or it could be anything and everything. And all over the world, the stuff people are coming up with, soup kitchens, everything, it's bringing them together. And it seems like just a really small thing, but the amount of grads that have had the opportunity to meet people that they wouldn't otherwise have met and then form those friendships or relationships has made a huge difference.
Thanks, Caroline. We actually had a fascinating conversation with someone earlier this week who's a hybrid working specialist. And the cry from her is, she said, what we need to create curated experiences for people to come together. She said, the last thing people need in the office is a desk. People have desks at home, they have phones, they have Wi-Fi connection. What they need is connection with people. So when we create these curated experiences to come together, that's events without technology. Let's put people in the room and give them space away from the tech to be together and see what comes up. And we need to stop measuring our productivity around the amount of Teams and Zoom calls we have and emails we get through. And it's the spark of inspiration that comes from being in a room with people. So I love that idea of events and curating experiences for people to come together. So in terms of questions, Dee, for one more, has anything come through the chat that you'd like to put to somebody?
Yes, so we've had a question from Angela, and Angela has put this to Philip, actually, Philip, and it might be our grad self-organized networking. So this is an answer to your question, Philip. They're Angela's grads self-organized networking events that bring them into the office, and they set up business leader presentations that create reasons to come into the office. Something nice. I would I suppose potentially add to that is I love the idea of the curated experiences. So rather than just coming in to sit at a desk and do back-to-back calls or, you know, work on Excel for the day when you really could do that at home, most of us don't need or want that. I suppose the distinction between lots of us and graduates is, as we've all discussed today, they've never been in a workplace before. So when I think back to how I learned as an early employee, I overheard, you know, more senior people having difficult conversations. I overheard my team unpicking a challenge. I overheard, you know, people laughing about something that I didn't realize was going to come up 100 times. And, you know, I didn't have to worry about it because it's funny rather than something to panic about. Had I not been in the office to overhear those things, they likely wouldn't have come up over a Zoom call. So I think any of the ideas like Angela's, Philip, and like the curated experiences or networking, even if that's just over lunch, if that's after work, if you can then encourage them to come into the office and maybe work alongside each other for a specific, I know everyone's got a number of days or period of time in mind, there is that incidental learning opportunity that I think so many of us benefited from earlier in our careers, that still feels really, really valuable for this audience right now.
Can I just add as well, thank you, Deandra. I think getting exciting experiences in the office to get people to come is one way. I think, Philip, we all know that it would be good for grads to come together as a community, that sense of belonging for their well-being, to get inspiration, to get incidental learning. But if that isn't of value to them and they're still saying they don't want to come, how do you encourage them to come? And I think another thing to add to the list is to make sure we get to know people really well. Get to know them well and ask them, what is it that they want from a workplace? What is it that they're missing? Get to know what are their values, and then reframe coming into the office to suit them. So it plays to what they're actually looking for, because there's loads of different reasons. And the things that would appeal to me and make me go to the office aren't the same as the things that would appeal to you, Philip, or the things that would appeal to Caroline. So knowing people well and actually having lots of different reasons for people to come in, to play to lots of different personality types and value sets will be really useful. Thank you.
I also just quickly add a tiny thing on the end of that, which is I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Claire, in that there are lots of reasons why grads might not want to come into the office. And for me, as an introvert who also enjoys social interaction, the thought of perhaps going into a big, scary office where you're meeting people for the first time could be quite scary. So I think, you know, tapping value of I've got a value of connection, and therefore the idea of actually connecting with people on a really real sense would make me want to come in. So I think, yeah, tapping into the reasons why they might not want to, and then giving them reasons to that make a lot more sense to them.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Philip. Fantastic question and brilliant answers. I'm so sorry, Angela, I know you've got your hand up. We have run out of time for questions, but if you pop it in the chat, I can pose it to someone and ask them to come back to you after today, if that's okay. It's now my time for my golden ticket moment. So we have picked somebody who's here who will attend, and they get a free place fully funded by Ivy House, either for themselves or someone in their organisation to attend our Life Leader programme. If you are the lucky winner, we will get in touch with you after today to arrange logistics. So my glamorous assistant has put a name in front of me, and our winner for the golden ticket is Danielle Holton. So we will be in touch with you. Thank you so much. Just a couple of things to let you know. As I mentioned, we will be sharing the event recording with you after today. And we'll also be emailing you about our next event, which is running on the 23rd of November. And that event is called How to Develop Relationships, Connection and Belonging in the Hybrid World. So hopefully we'll see lots of you guys there. The final thing to let you know, we're going to pop in the chat a link to a feedback survey. It's just a couple of questions, but it's also asking for your feedback on our next event, what you'd like to hear more about from us. So I would ask if you can spare us the 30 seconds, please fill that in. All that remains for me to do is thank all of you for attending, probably during your lunch break. I'm really grateful you could be here, and thank you to our speakers. It's been amazing, insightful, and hopefully lots of food for thought for people. So I hope to see you all at the next event. Thank you so much.
I've been chasing beauty.